month of, thank you, the month of September. ChangeMakers on Tuesday is brought to you by the Australia Together group, and we're able to do that because DSS very kindly provides some support for our event managers who are Collaboration for Impact to put on the event. So welcome everybody, particularly welcome if this is your first ChangeMakers on Tuesday's event. Now we're just going to have a little bit of housekeeping. Our guest speaker for this month is the National Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollonds, who's locked out of the meeting. I'll just have to fix that problem. Michelle, are you able to email Anne Hollonds with the correct Zoom link? Anne will be joining us very shortly. One of the perils of live events is when your guest speaker doesn't turn up, you age rapidly in just a few minutes, which is happening right now. But Michelle will get that link across to Anne, and Anne will be joining us very shortly. So we might start, as we always do, by acknowledging traditional owners of the lands we're joining from all around Australia. I'm here in Brisbane, so I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country. And if you like, you can pop in the chat the country that you're joining us from, or if you're really a Zoom aficionado, you can pop it in your name on the bottom of the screen. So welcome everybody. We've been really lucky with our guest speakers. So far we've had Joe Weatherall talking about Thrive by 5 and the early learning agenda. We've had Adrian Pazarski in August talking, or July, talking about the affordable housing crisis. Last month we had Penny Dakin talking about the follow on from the National Early Years Summit last year, and all of the work that a group called the National Early Years Catalysing Group is doing to bring an early years agenda to the country. And very shortly, we will have Anne Hollonds, the National Children's Commissioner, talking about her focus and agenda for children as the National Children's Commissioner. This month, we've got the Southern Moreton Bay Islands community is our community of the month. And we'll meet Karen and Craig from Simpy a little bit later on. And what else can I say to stall while Anne joins? Hope you're all well. And we'll go to random entertainment while we're waiting for Anne to join us. Why don't we just start very quickly by saying hello to Karen and Craig from Simpy. Karen, Craig, do you want to come off mute and say hello and just introduce yourself very quickly?
Hi, everybody. My name's Karen Dawson Sinclair, and I get the pleasure of working with the Southern Moreton Bay Island community around their aspirations for their place-based collective impact approach for children 0 to 8. Oh, and I work for Brisbane South PHN, who are supporting the initiative.
Welcome, Karen. Over to you, Craig.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matthew, am I correct in thinking that I am not on mute and can be heard? Excellent. Yeah, I'm employed by Brisbane South PHN, and I too have the pleasure of working with community leaders on the Southern Moreton Bay Islands, and Karen, my dear colleague, and other members in the Child, Youth and Family team and Brisbane South PHN. And looking forward to being able to have a bit of a conversation with people today about our work and ideally have a chance to have some good conversations or explore some questions that are meaningful and useful for people.
Fantastic, thanks, Craig. Michelle, I've just dropped you Anne's email, so hopefully that you can get that link across to Anne. While we're waiting, we might throw to Laura Barnes from the Australia Together group, who's got some exciting news about a new community of practice for place-based initiatives that is forming. Laura, thank you for stepping into the breach and saying something useful and exciting.
My pleasure, Matthew. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's awesome to be here. I am currently on Batula country in Hervey Bay, and I acknowledge the traditional owners here and pay my respects to elders past and present. It is Australia Together, so I am the convener for Australia Together. And we're really pleased to be involved in ChangeMakers on Tuesday and see the interest and engagement of ChangeMakers from across Australia, to come together, share, learn and engage with each other. We know how important that is. This is important and sometimes difficult work, and learning from each other is the way to proceed. Most of you probably know, but just in case you don't, Australia Together is an alliance of civil society leaders, came together in the height of COVID, although as I thought about that this morning, I now need to say in the height of COVID in 2020. And I guess came together around this idea that there was some opportunity in COVID, opportunity to build back better, to rethink how we govern, lead, do things differently in Australia and indeed across the world. We build a platform around kind of content areas of kids, jobs and housing, but a key part of our platform is this opportunity to change the way we govern and lead, an opportunity to place community, to place place at the heart of rebuilding and renewing post-COVID. So that's why we are involved in ChangeMakers on Tuesday. And as Matthew alluded, why we've also been involved in starting a community of practice around place-based approaches and research. We had our first gathering last week. So some of you have missed it, although I can also see some familiar faces from that gathering last week, and it's really pleasing to see you here as well. However, and I'll post a link in a minute, we've got our next event scheduled for November, 10th of November. This is a collaboration between the Sydney Policy Lab through their Real Deal projects, as well as Edith, I have to read this because it's a really long name, Edith Curtin University Strategic Research Centre for People, Place and Planet, and the Centre for Just Places at the Jesuit Social Services. So we came together a while ago through the Sydney Policy Lab, I guess, who brought us together to design and launch this community of practice. Like ChangeMakers on Tuesday, it's premised on the idea that there's many of us working in this space, and if we come together to learn from each other, build our understanding, we can improve and do things better, both through research and through practice. And this is a key part of, I guess, this community of practice, is how we connect those pieces, because we know that things are happening at both those levels. So as I say, you have missed the first session. It was last week. We had about, I think, definitely over 50 people attend, which was fabulous. We had a really good discussion around it. The first session focused around the Real Deal projects and the relational methods. So we're trying to focus on particular methods in each session. And what it did, as I said, is bring both the research together with practitioners on the ground, and we heard from them, as well as an opportunity to talk together across the members. The next session is on the November 11, and just pardon me while I copy this link. We have set up the Eventbrite so you can register for the next session. It's going to focus on Indigenous research methods and the connection to country and place. It promises to be a very exciting session, and I hope many of you can attend and be there. I guess the other important thing for me to say, and then I'll pass over back to Matthew, is we are building this plane while we are flying it. We spent a bit of last session seeking ideas from participants, people who were there, on what they want to see in the community of practice, topics, ideas, speakers, showcasing projects, etc. And also seeking anyone who wants to volunteer and come and join the organising committee. As I say, committee, that's a flash term for what we are, but the organising group. There's 4 or 5 of us in there, but we would appreciate any support and any assistance and any ideas you may have. If you're interested or want to find out more, I can post my contact details in the chat so you can get in touch with me. And that's about it. We really hope we can see you there on November 11, if not before.
Thanks so much, Laura. So get involved. I think the more we can connect all around the country with initiatives trying to do the same thing and support us, the better. Welcome, Anne Hollonds. I'm so sorry about that technical glitch. It's very good of you to persist. And welcome to ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. You're joining, I a whole bunch of people all around Australia who run place-based initiatives or support place-based initiatives or want to. So a very warm welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much, and so nice to see a few familiar faces there. And I can't believe that this far into the pandemic, I couldn't get myself into the Zoom call, but there you go. It still defies comprehension.
It works when it works, and when it doesn't work, it's terrifying. So no problem. Thanks so much for joining us, Anne. For those people who don't know, maybe we could just start with what does the National Children's Commissioner role do? Maybe give us a little bit of a history about the role.
So a bit of history. So I'm the second I should acknowledge the traditional owners where I'm joining from, the Camaragal people of the Eora Nations here in lockdown in Sydney. Not so warm as I know some of you are up in sunny Queensland. So, you know, I'm very jealous. Quite cold today. So I'm the second National Children's Commissioner. So it's still, in terms of human rights commissioners, this is still early days. That's what I've learnt already in my time here, that these things take a while to really get some sufficient kind of traction where they need to be able to be influential and impactful. So it is quite challenging. So many of you will know Megan Mitchell was in the role for 7 years, and then I've taken over from her. And and I think, you know, there was many achievements in that first term. But the one that I'd sort of point to of Megan's time is the fact that now I think it is widely recognised that we need to listen to kids, that policy that's not informed by the people that it's meant to help really isn't very effective. And that includes children and young people. And I've been really, really pleased to see how much is being done around the country and how well that idea is sort of taken off in a way. I think it was, you know, helped a lot by the Royal Commission as well, because that really showed that children who are silenced are not protected. And so I think we're all trying really hard to listen to kids as well. So I should say that the job is to monitor how well the policies and legislation and service systems are working to support the well-being and the rights of children. And I like to include families in that as part of it, simply because I don't see children as existing in isolation. So where we're looking at the effectiveness of policies, we also, for children, we also need to think about the policies that are supporting the families that are caring for the children. We know there's a very strong connection between the well-being of adults who are caring for kids and of those children. So is that enough background, Matthew? You guide me along here.
Certainly is, Anne. So people will be familiar perhaps with some of the state and territory-based children's commissioners, and they've got, in some cases, a reasonably sort of statutory role in the system. How does the National Children's Commissioner interact with those state-based agencies, or are you still working that out?
No, I think that's fairly well established. So we're all part of a group of children's commissioners. There's about 14 in all. And as you would know, some states have an Indigenous Children's Commissioner and a Children's Commissioner. They might have an advocate or a guardian. They might have an ombuds person. They have, you know, there are a bunch of different types of roles that come into this, and we gather together as a group of 14. I'm the only one nationally in that group. And I think what we've been trying to do in the last few months is very much look at, well, how could this group act in a more powerful way? Because actually they're quite powerful people, and they're actually the state-based ones are far more powerful than me when it comes to it. They've actually got proper powers, and they've got resources and regulatory sort of rights to enter institutions and that kind of thing has been given to them at the state level. So they see a lot that I don't see, and they know a lot, and they all have sort of varying degrees of independence. But as a group, we can make statements as long as everyone's obviously comfortable with it. And we did do that recently. We sent a letter to the Northern Territory. What's his title? I've forgotten.
Chief Minister.
Chief Minister, that's right. I was going to call him administrator, but that didn't sound right. The Chief Minister in the Northern Territory, when they were about to change the laws to actually harsher mandatory sort of detention of young people and ankle bracelets and all of that. So we that's an example of where we've kind of acted together. So there will be moments where we can do that, and what I'm really interested in doing is linking what the State and Territory Commissioners are doing and seeing on the ground with national policy, which is my area of responsibility, because there really often isn't a good bridge between the two, except potentially via the government departments themselves. And they, of course, have their own kind of restrictions and limitations as to how far they can go. So because we sit outside of government, I think there's potential for quite an influential voice.
So it strikes me as quite a difficult balance in the role, in that to some degree you're an entity that exists inside a public framework, government framework, but you've got to be independent and have that review and in some case critique role. How are you finding walking that tightrope?
Yes, well, it is quite a learning curve, Matt, and but I guess it all comes down to the sort of the way that you manage the opportunities that you have, I suppose. So obviously I've had to build a lot of relationships where they didn't exist, and whilst I might have had relationships with ministers in certain Commonwealth departments in the past, there were others I didn't, and so I've had to go about building those relationships. But then, and I guess my message to them is that that really it's better to try to work collaboratively to improve policy for children rather than to have me coming in and pointing out human rights breaches all of the time. So the invitation is there for a very constructive, productive relationship. But there are moments, and recently there's been that moment that I've seen a window open where I've started to call for a COVID recovery plan for children. This will be of more interest, obviously, to those of you in Victoria and New South Wales and ACT. And this was on the back of the fact that we were seeing such dire indicators of mental health decline in children, even very young children, and the presentations of children in emergency departments, and obviously the rising numbers of calls to Kids Helpline and elsewhere. And this was just getting worse and worse and worse. The schools have remained locked down for incredibly long periods. And anyway, so I have publicly called for a recovery plan for kids that would not only ensure that we've got a more systematic way of weighing up the health risks with the other risks in terms of development and well-being of children, and I guess the broader role that schools play and early childhood education plays, but also attention to what kids have already missed out on up till now. And that's not just in terms of learning, but broadly, again, development and well-being. The kids that have missed out because they're not able to be supported for their development at home for all the reasons that you will understand. But of course, for kids who've actually suffered as a result because of the shadow pandemic of child abuse and domestic violence. So I've called for there to be a plan for extra help for these kids who are struggling now, and will continue to struggle in coming months and potentially years. Just like we're helping struggling businesses, we need to pay attention to what we can do for these kids. And I guess the other thing that I've drawn attention to is the fact that I think it's often the case that policy is designed for adults. That's a fact. Adults are centre stage. They're the voters. They get the dominant attention. And policy that's designed for adults often overlooks the unique needs of children. So we do need to learn how to actually make policy for children as well, and to address their needs. We're not very familiar, I don't think, to talk in these terms. We're also not very familiar with the idea that children should even be a policy priority. What I'm finding is that there's not necessarily a level of comfort, and I'm talking both sides of politics now. There's not necessarily the sort of comfort one might expect, given certainly in this group, where we would all, and I believe most Australians would say, they want all kids to have the best start in life, that they're our values, but we're not necessarily seeing that same set of values reflected in the policy that's developed by our decision makers. And part of it, I think, is the fact that children are seen as a private thing. They're an appendage of the parents, and even worse, they're an appendage of women. And when women are seen as secondary, treated not equally, then children are treated even less fairly and don't get anywhere near the attention they need.
Now, I'm sure, Anne, you wouldn't mind taking some questions from the group. So we're going to do
Absolutely.
this, for those of you who haven't joined us before, Q&A style, like on the TV. So if you'd like to drop your question into the chat, when we've got a moment, I'll ask you to come off mute and ask a question. But if you'd like to or make a comment, or make an observation, or ask Anne a question, just drop your thought into the chat and we'll come to you as soon as we can. So Anne, obviously you've pointed to the dominant issue of COVID and its effect on everybody, but children in particular. I was talking to the chief executive of the Children's Health Service here in Queensland the other day, and he's really deeply worried about the next 5 to 10 years, and saying the mental health pandemic, the developmental impacts of the pandemic on children is just really unknown at this point, but is likely to be substantial. In terms of the COVID recovery plan for children, I think it's such a timely thing to draw our focus. Do you think those sorts of mental health issues are going to feature in the plan? And where do you think that sort of plan should come from? It should be led federally or through National Cabinet? Was it a civil society plan, or a bit of all of the above?
It's probably all of the above. I mean, I'll take it wherever I can get it, frankly. Obviously, I would ideally love it to be part of what's called the National COVID Plan. That does sit at National Cabinet level. Frankly, though, I've had those who've worked in policy at very senior levels for a long time say to me, "You're dreaming, Anne, children will never make it to National Cabinet." So I've had a pretty sort of serious reality check there. So I think it is about trying to, though, I suppose in a way that I have a longer term aim here. So I'm not just looking at today, although I have concerns about today. I have concerns about the next decade post-COVID. And so it's really about starting the conversation about the fact that there are responsibilities at all the different levels, and that we do need to start to make better policy with children in mind. And, whether we do it about reopening the schools, or whether we do it after the schools have reopened over other elements of things. But, there will be, I agree with that person you were talking to, there will be things that we'll be talking about this for a long time. And recently I have done some consultations around Australia to inform their national framework for protecting Australia's children, the successor plan. and I met with 400 kids and parents. And I guess there are a number of themes emerging, which I can go through later if you want. But I guess the overall message from those consultations is that the systems are broken. I mean, again, no surprises to any of you here, but hearing it directly from these were targeted consultations. So these are the kids that are at risk of entering care, or you know, they're the risk of a whole lot of different harms. And so the truth is that even before COVID, we had a very fragmented landscape of services, that it was definitely a lottery depending on where you were born. And I guess the stories that I've heard throughout this year have really reinforced that you know, the fact that the systems are as patchy as they are means that it makes it really hard for families to keep their kids safe and well. We actually make it hard for them. So I saw people going through to enormous lengths to try and get over the barriers that were in their way. And these are the things we need to be working on. So whether it's about the COVID plan today, or it's another named plan down the track, I don't really care. I just want to get children in the conversation somehow. And that's what I think all of us can be doing together to ensure that the decision makers notice that children have unique needs that are not addressed by policy developed by adults for adults.
And I think, you know, many of us on the call who've been involved in place-based work, those systemic, you know, fractures are really what's behind many of the initiatives that the people are running on the call today. Thanks to Fiona and Michelle. We've got two questions. We've got time for a quick response, I think. So Fiona, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, Anne.
Fiona.
This is possibly a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, but I was interested in your perspective of a child protection approach, a public health approach to child protection, and your views about the merit of that perspective. Thank you.
Well, I think I'll just draw on what I heard from my consultations recently, because they're very fresh in my mind. We asked two questions of the people, the kids and the parents we met with. One was, what is it that keeps you, what is it that helps keep safe and well? In other words, what's working? Who and what is supporting you? And then we asked, what are the barriers? What gets in the way? What are the gaps? What makes it hard for families to keep their kids safe and well? And I'll just, in answer to Fiona's question, I'll just quickly go through some of the key themes. So aside from the system is broken generally, housing, massive issue. Again, no surprises to any of you, but I was truly shocked at some of the particularly young parents I met who were couch surfing with babies and toddlers, and they were leaving violent relationships usually. And I met them everywhere around the country. So it wasn't just in one place, you know, this was a around the country problem. So housing, a massive issue, violence, massive at home, on their streets, at school. Kids didn't feel safe going to school. And actually there's huge issues about the role of the education system, which we probably don't have time to talk about here. You know, it was clear that there were very complex and multi-layered problems, and that these were being exacerbated by the complex and multi-layered, and so the systems themselves were so complex. So, you know, things like income security and public transport, you know, like massive issues. So all of these things, which, you know, I guess we would consider to be part of what we expect to be everywhere in Australia to support us to live well, were either absent or just too hard to be accessed by those living in with disadvantage of some kind. And I often found myself wondering, how can we expect people to really be able to keep their kids safe and well if we're not providing some of these basics? So for me, this is what child protection is all about, actually. It's about creating the conditions that enable parents to do what they want to do, and that is to be the best mum or dad they can be. And you know, there's a lot of gaps at the moment.
We've got time for one more question from Michelle. Marion's dropped another Dorothy Dixer, I think, into the chat. Would a broader discussion around equity provide a platform for discussing children's needs, especially those from lower socioeconomic groups? I think, of course, Marion has a great point. And that's where we've got to get to, isn't it? This sort of comprehensive approach to well-being and prosperity for our whole community.
And I think that's, sorry, Matt, if I can just add that,
sure.
I think what's happened is COVID again has amplified that lack of equity, and, you know, even being talked about in the media today with the different parts of Sydney being treated differently, and, you know, very serious problems. And the fact that we tolerate what are essentially chronic human rights crises, such as with First Nations children, we really should not be continuing to tolerate those problems. And we should, I think, as citizens, be standing up and asking for more from our leaders. And so that's what I'm hoping, that there will, over time, we will be listened to about these things. But at the moment, it's remarkable how children's issues they don't want to hear about them. That's what I'm experiencing.
It's surprising, really. I would have thought it was an obvious thing for our governments to be interested in. Now, Michelle, you wanted to just come back to the situation in the Northern Territory. If you'd like to put your question or comment to Anne, and then we'll move on to other exciting topics in the agenda after we say thanks to Anne. But we've got time for Michelle. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Anne. Earlier, you referenced the very powerful letter that was endorsed by yourself and all of the commissioners around the country, addressed to Gunnar, who's the NT Chief Minister. I read in the media that it hadn't been respected with a reply. And if that's still the case, I'm curious about your role as National Commissioner, given that you've just highlighted some of the frustrations that people in power don't seem to want to listen. What more can be done? Where do your thoughts go in terms of your office or the NT Children's Commissioner about holding decision makers to account, particularly given in the NT that we've got a $24 million youth justice facility being built right now, right next door to the adult prison in Alice Springs. And we also have predominantly Aboriginal children and young people in custody, and the government is spending more money on refurbishing Dondale Detention Centre, a former adult prison, because they expect more children to be in detention because of the bail changes. So I just wanted to set that current context, because we all struggle with what do we do in the face of things keeping on turning. Things are happening no matter what we do on the ground. And I'm really keen.
I know. It's incredibly frustrating and distressing. So I went to Dondale and I met with the boys there, and I can tell you my heart shattered in a million pieces that day. These young boys, basically all they said they wanted to have change was they wanted to get training to get a job, so that when they got out of Dondale, they wouldn't have to come back in, right? And so, and they talk what kept them, what supported them was the love of their family. That was the term that was used by these boys. I mean, they're just kids, right? Who Anyway, to answer to your question, there are a number of things that arose out of my time in the Northern Territory that are we're writing up now in our report on what needs to be in the implementation plan to this national framework. So that was the reason we were there, and so that we're sort of finishing that report now. But as well as that, simultaneously, what I'm trying to do is to really engage more deeply with some of the people in the NT who about their strategies that are being taken, for example, to try and transform what detention means, how detention is. If you're going to have detention, then what can you do? How can you reframe what detention is to actually be something that saves these children's lives rather than, leads them down the path to more crime? The other area in the NT that I'd be quite interested in looking at is the education system, where, for example, I saw some fabulous early childhood education programs in remote communities, but then found that it stops at 5 because there's not that transition to school. And, obviously there are multiple issues about kids not being engaged in school. And so there's some of the things that I'm really interested in pursuing by way of, I guess, a multi-layered strategy to try and see what could be done alongside the Commissioner in the Northern Territory, of course, and trying to support her to pursue these objectives. So I think my short answer is sometimes there's a case for, kind of doing battle in the media. Sometimes there's a time for sort of working behind the scenes. And I know alongside all of you, I know you're all working behind the scenes and publicly wherever you can. And I guess what I'd be keen to do is to try and support you as much as I can on what is a complex set of issues, but clearly, as I said before, a set of issues that I can't accept that we're still tolerating what's happening. And I find it completely unacceptable. And I would be very happy if the whole of the Australian community stood up and said, this is unacceptable. It needs to change. So.
And thank you so much. We're out of time, but thank you for fighting the good fight. And one must be a very difficult job at times, and you see things that are hard to unsee, and you keep going and keep championing the rights of our children and calling for better ways. And we really value the role that you're playing. And I'm sure people on the call, Anne's incredibly accessible for an office holder of such a senior role, and I'm sure she'd welcome contact with communities.
Absolutely, yes, please just write to me direct anytime. Matt knows how to find me. He'll give you my email address. And really, if there is anything I can do to help that, please contact me. And great, and congratulations everyone on this this collaboration that you've got going. And I wish you very well in the future, and look forward to bumping into you sometime again.
Thanks so much, Anne. Now, in ChangeMakers on Tuesday style, we do Auslan clapping, which is also known as jazz hands. So big thank you to Anne.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Anne. We'll see you next time.
See you. Bye.
Well, wow, some people got a tough job, don't they? Wow, that's just great to have someone with Anne's experience. We didn't have a chance to ask Anne about how she's come to this job, but many of you will know she's got a very long history in children's services and children's rights issues. But moving right along, let's go to our halftime entertainment, which is provided by our Community of the Month, which is the Southern Moreton Bay Islands Community, or Simpy for short. And we're going to you, Karen, I think, and you're going to give us a multimedia presentation.
Well, I'm going to attempt to get it going, Matthew. But before I share screen, I would just, first off, we'd like to acknowledge the Quandamooka people whose land on which the Simpy work is done on over on the Southern Moreton Bay Islands. And I'd just like to acknowledge that Amy, who is a very committed community member, isn't able to be with us today. And she in her being super deadly, has put this together, and I hope you enjoy it. Did that work? Is the sound coming with that? I don't think the sound came.
Maybe give it one more try. Sometimes it just needs, you know, to wake up a bit.
G'day. Simpy is a very beautiful place to live. However, we face many challenges here. According to the 2018 CFA data, we are amongst the most disadvantaged communities in Australia. The rates of breaches of domestic violence orders are 4 times higher than that of Redland Bay, our closest mainland suburb. It was a tragic event involving domestic and family violence in 2018 that moved our community to call for action. In response to this tragic event and community calling for action, Redland City Council hosted a series of workshops to address these community concerns, and this was where the Brisbane South Primary Health Network approached the Simpy community, and this is where our collective impact initiative began. Our initiative is focused on Simpy children aged 0 to 8 years and their families, and the very first step was conducting community conversations. So this is where Karen from the Brisbane South Primary Health Network mentored 2 community members in the Harwood approach, and this is the methodology that we used to conduct our conversations. So we went out to the community. Over a 6-month period, we went to as many local events, held one-on-one and group conversations. We had many incidental chats in our community, and we also sent out some online surveys. This was a fantastic part of our work, and we absolutely loved getting out and talking to people on the islands. Wherever Simpy children and families gathered, we were there. Once we'd held all these conversations, we had to record, theme and harvest every single one to create our data set. So we're a bit overwhelmed at this prospect, and we approached the team at Hands Up Mallee, another collective impact initiative in Victoria, and we asked if we could utilise their methodology as they'd already done this. They very graciously agreed, and we've remained friends and colleagues with the team there ever since. Once this work had been completed, we had our data set from Community Voice. We went back out to community and we checked, did we hear you right? After getting the go-ahead from them, we had our foundational data ready to present at our very first Community Governance Table meeting. This was a real milestone in our project in 2019. Community Voice has led our work from the very beginning, and this will never change. Along the way, we gathered passionate locals who wanted to come on the journey with us. Some of them were people that we'd known for a long time, and some of them were people that we'd never met before. They dubbed themselves the Simpy listeners, and this amazing group of people come from all walks of life and from all of the 4 islands. This group form our founding members and also make up our current board of Simpy Listeners Inc. This is our community-owned and controlled organisation. It's made up entirely of locals, and this is an essential element of us staying accountable to the Simpy community. For too long, the Simpy community have felt done to and not done with, so we understand the importance of community-facing comms campaigns. We've achieved this mostly through our Simpy Listeners Inc. Facebook page, which has about 650 followers. Our most successful posts, which include videos about services, stories from Simpy and giveaways, reach over 1,000 interactions. We are really, really proud of this work because we've done it all through in-kind contributions and targeted community engagement campaigns. So, what's next for the Simpy Community Impact Initiative? Firstly, we'd really like to acknowledge the Brisbane South Primary Health Network. Their ongoing support, mentoring and guidance have been instrumental in us as community people and as an organisation being as successful as we have been. We really feel that basing this work in Community Voice from the outset has been the critical success factor in us getting this far. We know we have a really long way to go, but look how far we've come. As a community-led organisation, Simpy Listeners Inc. are now taking over responsibility of the Community Governance Table. We're also bringing key service providers and community together to our focus area workshops. How amazing is it that community members have been mentored and supported to be able to do this? Through love of our community and ongoing support, we know we will go from strength to strength and achieve fantastic stuff for our community. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow, a multimedia presentation that's worked. That's fantastic. We might roll on. Normally we would, after our sort of halftime entertainment, we'd go to some breakout groups to meet each other in small groups. We're probably running a little bit behind time, so we might just roll on with our Community of the Month discussion. And we'll welcome again Karen and Craig. So Karen, for those of you, we saw a little map at the beginning, but just tell everybody where Southern Moreton Bay Islands is, or where Moreton Bay is, and then where the Southern Moreton Bay Islands are.
Okay, so for those of you who are not from the Brisbane area, the Southern Moreton Bay Islands are based off Redlands, which is the Redlands Logan City Council area. So down Wynnum, Capalaba, out that way. And the islands are actually, the only way in and out to Simpy is on a ferry boat, which takes you on a good trip, half an hour, on a long trip, 45 minutes, depending on which way you go around. And so over on the islands, there's no major shops. There's a local IGA on 2 of the islands, and there's a couple of GP clinics. There's 2 schools, but apart from that, there's actually not a lot of service provision over on the islands. But one of the contributing factors to why the Simpy initiative has come about is there's lots of service providers funded to provide service to Simpy, and they don't take into account that, okay, you get on the ferry, but then what happens when you get off the ferry? Because they think they can walk it. And do you know what I mean? Like, so Russell Island particularly is 12K across. So unless you want to be super fit in the heat of the sun, it's a big day if you're beating the feet around Simpy.
There's a pretty unique community. There's about 6,000 residents in total. Is that about right?
Yep, that's about right. So, and that equates then to, and, you know, we're waiting on the new, you know, census data to come out. So all we've got to go from at the moment is the old 2016, which was all a bit hit and miss. So we're predominantly looking at about 7,500, not 7,000, 750 kids in the 0 to 8 cohort for the islands. So and that's enough to warrant, you know, like 2 schools. And there's still a number of children that actually make the trip to the mainland, back to the mainland schools. And every child from Simpy for high school has to go to the mainland. There's no other option unless it's homeschooling.
Yeah, and it is a pretty unique community, isn't it? Because there's 4 islands. They're pretty close together. You could literally swim from one to the other if you were keen, and you may not want to, but you could. And it's a really beautiful place. I've been there recently for a family gathering, and I think I got on sunset, we were cooking dinner and we heard this strange noise coming from the waterfront, and there was a dugong snuffling its way down the beach. So not your average suburb.
No, and it's an absolute pleasure and a beautiful spot to go and support community and their aspirations. And it's, you know, when you start actually listening to community, I live in Logan, I come from Logan, so I know what it's like when people talk about your community in the deficit. And the community members of Simpy are no different. They're actually sick of it. They're sick of having their story hit media or, you know, come to light when people are talking about them in the deficit. But it is truly an amazing community with great community spirit and connectiveness.
We heard a bit about it, the origin story in the little video. But it's been a really self-generated initiative, hasn't it? It's come from the community and local people put it together with some help. But just tell us a little bit more about that getting going story, because a lot of people in the call are trying to get things cooking in their local community. So how did it happen in the Simpy community?
So as you've seen in the little clip, there was a huge media interest and swell from a murder that happened over on the islands. The Redland City Council brought together stakeholders, community members. They conducted a number of roundtables, you know, like from that approach. But community were feeling that there was lots of talk happening from within those roundtables and not a lot of action. But one of the outcomes that did happen was that Brisbane South PHN, who does not have a footprint prior to this over on the Southern Moreton Bay Islands, you know, just asked some people within the group, so to make outcomes for children better on Simpy, who would we have to talk to? And that colleague was actually talking to someone that ran a horticultural thing, business on Simpy, and she went, you need to go and talk to them people over there. I grow the plants, they grow the children. So we actually went and had a conversation with them around, for things to look differently for children on Simpy, what would that look like? And so we then progressed just to keep having conversations. And I remember my first trip, you know, like to Simpy, and it was cold and rainy this first day that I went. And when it rains over there, the rain is horizontal, like, so it's an interesting journey. My approach, I went over to have a conversation with people around what would it look like to go and just talk to the people and ask the community members what they would like. We're hearing all of these stories, but wouldn't it be good if we could just go and talk to the people? And this is where the relationship started to commence. Brisbane South then agreed to fund the local childcare centre, who employed 2 staff to specifically work on conducting community conversations across the islands, so that we could hear from the community what was important to them, what were their barriers, who were they going to trust to move forward, and who did we need to bring together around it. So that's how it all started.
And I heard in the clip again that the Harwood approach was the methodology used for the community listening process. Some people know all about the Harwood methodology, some people won't. Just give us a 30-second burst on Harwood, Karen, if you can.
The Harwood model is a really awesome tool to be using at the beginning stages of these initiatives. And it virtually provides you with a set of guidelines, tools, framework to go and have some community conversations in the community. So then you're starting conversations, you're harvesting them, and from that, you're actually drawing out a set of themes around what is the community priorities. And this is where the beauty of bringing in collective impact into the alignment, you know, like to that, because we also need the data narrative, we need the sense-making element from the service provision world as well, so that we can actually start to move into that you know, mutual and shared agreements, the co-creation, co-design elements of moving forward.
So if you want to check out Harwood, it is a great methodology for social change, developed by Rich Harwood, who some of you will know of. It's HARWOOD if you want to Google the Harwood Institute. We might come to you, Craig, quickly before we wrap up. Just looking ahead, and your involvement in Simpy. Looking ahead, what do you hope for the next year or two for the initiative?
That's a good question, Matthew. I think what I'd be hoping for is is to keep building and maturing from where the initiative is at to date. So as Karen's mentioned, I think it's really critical with this work that we're sensitive to the conditions of a place and the culture of a place, and build from where they are at and also where the service providers are at and other partners. I think we've done a reasonable job with that. And that's in all credit to the community people that have been involved in playing a key role in this, and also in Karen in being able to build that level of trust with community leaders that has enabled us to, I suppose, see our get agreement on what the true north is. So what we're looking at ahead, we've started by having very much an experimental approach. So that's going quite well, and people are starting to get that. What we need to do ahead is put further rigour and a little more meat around the bones as far as that's concerned, because that's critical. Because I think some of this work, it can sometimes overpromise and underdeliver, and sometimes I think the level of confidence some people have around just what the solutions are, I'm not quite so confident as some. I like to, I think there's a lot of freedom in approaching it in a testing approach and making sure we've got some rigour around that so that it democratises ideas and you can validate them in place. So we're wanting to go deeper around that and have more rigour around that. The other thing that, as Karen's mentioned earlier too, is just as far as the data goes, both what I'd call soft and hard data. What we're also learning as we go is that some of the data you think would be readily available is not in existence. It takes time to work through that. So we're going to, I'd like to see that continue to strengthen over the next little while. And then most importantly of all, I think with all our work, we're trying to make sure that we've got a level of capability building that sits underneath everything we do. So Simpy listeners and the community leaders that are involved to date, PHN has been investing and working in a way that's alongside that group of people, and we're wanting to continue to build their capability. And alongside that, there's also a need for building some additional capacity, because this doesn't run on thin air. It does require some resourcing. So I think seeing what functions sit best with those community leaders and that community organisation, and then what scaffolding's required around that organisation is going to be a key focus over the next 12 months or so.
Thanks so much, Craig. That's it for this month, everyone. Could you please thank Simpy? Good luck, Symbyites. Please thank Simpy for their fantastic work. Some of the best work I've seen, actually, in terms of starting off with a really deep-rooted grassroots feel for the community generated by the community. So fantastic work. Next month, we're on October the 12th, Tuesday, October the 12th. Tell your friends, bring folks along. In coming months, I don't think we've got our guest speaker for October, but in coming months, very exciting, good Glyn Davis, Professor Glyn Davis, who's the CEO of the Paul Ramsay Foundation. For those of you who are chasing philanthropic money, you might want to be there for that one. And we've also got in December, Cheryl Batula, who's an Aboriginal woman from Queensland who's pioneering some neurodevelopment and healing methodologies, which are getting incredible results, particularly with vulnerable young people in the justice system. So Cheryl's got an amazing story, amazing life story, and the work she's doing is quite incredible. So some fantastic speakers coming up. If you'd like to be Community of the Month, let us know. And have a great month, and we will see you on October the 12th.
Thanks.